This is session number 3 of Survey of the New Testament, and we are going to dive in to the first of the Gospels, the Gospel of Matthew. Fun, fun, fun. Okay, so we're going to use the same sort of rubric or guide to look at every single one of the books of the New Testament, okay? The things we're going to use are who, when, and to whom, where and why, what is it about, and then essentially if we want to look at the outline of the book, which is to save time, sort of why I'm giving you guys these handouts, because it does a really good job of looking at the book and what each chapter is focused on. So that way we don't have to go chapter by chapter in class, but your book does go into details about that as well. Okay, so that's essentially the rubric we're going to use. And so let's look at the book of Matthew first. Now, I made a mention, I can't remember if it was on camera or off camera, about Jeff. Because at some point, we all got tired of saying the name Paul. And so and this is the very first time I taught this class, we started making a joke. And I would be like, who wrote it? And I can't remember if I did it or the class did it. And somebody was like, I don't know, Jeff? And it was like, sure, it was good old Jeff. But we just knew that it meant Paul. And Casey was in that class. Yeah, so Jeff, So it was funny. But anyway, that was what that reference was about. So eventually, we're not there yet, but we will get there. To where Paul's just going to seem like he's writing everything out here in the New Testament for us, which is fun, but we'll get there. So speaking of the who do we think wrote the book of Matthew? Matthew? Matthew who?
Levi.
Matthew who? Tax collector? Sure. Yeah, right? Right? So, Matthew, what else was he? He started as a tax collector. What did he become? One of the 12 apostles, right? Mm-hmm. So, what we get, question, what's the evidence that Matthew is the author of this gospel, right? We know Matthew was one of the 12 apostles that got chosen by Christ, right? And we see that in his own book, Matthew 10, verses 1 through 3. We know he was a tax collector by profession or by trade, right? That's what he did. What did that make him to his fellow people? An outcast, despised, a traitor, low life, scum, worst of the worst, sinner-wise, right? There's other sections of scripture that say all these horrible people and tax collectors, and they're like way down, right? So culturally, he was going through it. Let's put it that way. Because again, he's taking taxes from his own people group for the occupying political group, the Romans, right? It's not a great thing. Essentially, if you were to put him in a social class, he would be super wealthy, but super low in society, which now usually people who are super wealthy are super high in society. But in his case, it was super, super rich, but down low in the totem pole, so to speak. Essentially a heathen. Maybe that's another word you could use for him. Okay, so that's the who. When was it written? Between AD 50 and AD 55. Now, on your sheets that I gave you, they use way broader windows than your textbook does. And that's because this is a Sunday school type resource, so they speak in more generalities. Again, please don't use those as part of the class. It's just an extra bonus thing. Use your book, use lecture for dates and things, okay? So between AD 50 and AD 55 is when it was written, which puts it really soon, right? Jesus died when? In the 30s, 33, right? 33.
I don't know. What's interesting is this. My Bible says times 4 BC to AD 33, but I assume that means that's the time of which the book is about, not the time it was written.
Correct.
Okay.
Because it goes, well, I mean, it goes even
To
further back
Jesus'
than that.
life,
There's
basically.
Jesus's genealogies and stuff are in
Okay.
there as well.
Yeah.
But yes.
Okay.
So, to who was it written, or to whom, to be correct? To whom was the book written?
The Jewish people.
To the Jewish people. Jewish, or Jewish Christians? Jewish, or Jewish Christians? Jewish Christians. Okay. Where and why did he write it? Essentially, where was it located? The readers of the book, and why did he write it? Sorry, let me clarify my question. So the early fathers of the day believe that Judea was the audience. Okay? Now remember, where did Jesus do the bulk of his ministry? Galilee, right? And then where was the one other book that he did his ministry in this place? John, right? So I think that's interesting. He is essentially writing to the audience of the place where Jesus did all of his ministry in the book of John. Does that make sense? Maybe I made that confusing. Is that,
Like telling them over there, here's what he did over here.
Correct.
Because you didn't see it, you didn't
Right.
hear it. Let me tell you that.
Yep. Okay, so that's what they believe. And then there's also there's a little bit of a disagreement here. Some believe that it was actually Antioch was who he was writing to. Okay, and so you could essentially say both answers could be correct, because how come he could totally have written to two audiences? Who knows, right? But based on the content of the book, based on the stories that were chosen to be told, because as we know, not every story is in every gospel, right? Mm-hmm. Especially because of the synoptic problem, they can ascertain to whom they were writing. Did you have your hand up?
Yes. Just a question.
Sure.
Which one do you believe he was writing to, and why do some people suggest that it was Antioch instead of Judea?
It's a long answer. For time's sake, I'll say I believe it was option number 1, and for the rest, check your textbook.
Right.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm trying to also catch us up. That's a good question, though, and maybe it's something we can talk about.
Center of Christianity.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'll say my reasoning is I tend to believe the people who were around at the time. And that's just my personal bent, right? So earlier fathers of the church who were sourcing and referencing these things believed it to be to this group of people. I'm going to side with that. Scholars could prove it wrong, right? And then I'll change my mind. But since it's kind of a divided answer, I'm going to go with the earlier reference, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Why did they write it? Or he, sorry, not they. To present Christ. Oh, did I go too far? Oops, yep, I did, sorry. Hold on, there we go. To present Christ as the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy, right? Because think about what we're doing right now. This is the first book of the New Testament, yes? Mm-hmm. We have had a whole bunch of nothing prior to this, right? Yep. So essentially this book, it would be super important for the first book of the New Testament to bridge the gap, essentially, right? And so he's essentially going, hey guys, all the stuff that was in the Old Testament, it's Jesus. It's all about him, right? And that's point number 1. Bridge the gap, Old Testament to New Testament. As the first, like I said, as the first book of the New Testament, it connects the past with the present and to the future. Okay, it also provides teaching content of Christ's ministry for use in the church, right? Because the whole time, as these people are traveling around, they're traveling around not just as the disciples, but groups of people are following them, right? They're meeting together in houses. They're going to places for dinner. He's teaching in synagogue. He's affecting people, right? So the whole time, the aim is still, even though the Great Commission hasn't technically rolled out and the book of Acts and the Holy Spirit hasn't come yet, the aim and goal is still, hey, Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Leave your other belief system behind and come and follow Jesus, right? That's still the goal, okay? And then to provide hope in view of the impending judgment that the king would soon return and set up his kingdom is the third subpoint. So this heavenly kingdom is different than what the Jewish people were expecting. And I think that's important to note because, again, the Jews were dealing with occupation, right? They were being occupied militarily by the Romans. Essentially, the Messiah, to most of them, was supposed to be somebody who was going to come and set them free in a political way or in a warring way, in a overthrow the occupying government type of way and give us back our land like it's supposed to be, right? Give us back what should be ours. Get Rome out of here. Jesus didn't do that. right? The kingdom that Matthew focuses on with Jesus is actually the heavenly one, the one that's ultimately to come, right? Is that clearish?
Yeah.
Okay. So, what's it about? Let's look at that. The theme, this is the central theme to the whole book, is Christ is the King of the Jews, right? So again, it's knowing your audience. Who are you talking to? A group of people who are looking for a king to come and save them. It's just not in the way that they thought, right? But he still presents to them Jesus, King of the Jews. Does that make sense? The key verse is Matthew 21, verse 5. Can somebody pull that up and read it for us, please?
Behold, your king is coming to you.
Dun, 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 right?
Yeah, really.
With the trumpet sound, right? So that's the key scripture. And then there are several key words and phrases. Do you guys have all of those written down on your slide? They are in your book. I know that, the key words and phrases. I just want to know if I need to go line by line for you or not.
No, I don't have.
I don't think that they're
The
up here
keywords
either.
are not on the slides.
Okay. So I'll just read them to you. You can get them from your book as well, so don't feel like you have to hurry and jot them all down. So the phrase end of the age is mentioned 5 times. Father of God is mentioned 44 times. Kingdom, 23 times. Kingdom of heaven, 32 times. Righteous, 17. Righteousness, 7. Son of David, 10. That it might be fulfilled, 15. That goes back to, again, remember, we're having to tie it back to the Old Testament, which was full of prophecy, right? So that it might be fulfilled. Let's see. Which was spoken in the Old Testament is mentioned 20 times. Worship, 14 times. And then also something important to note is Matthew, he uses the word church. And his is the only gospel to actually utilize or call the church by name. So Matthew, only one. So Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, 4, just Matthew, the very first one. So essentially, the precedent or the idea of first things is here, right? First mention. You should take note of that. And then we're going to see it again come in Acts. But it is the only gospel that mentions it.
What did he call it? Was that like a Greek term or
Church?
church?
I would have to look it up in the Strongs and see which actual word he used, because there's church meaning the building and then there's church meaning the body. So I'd have to look it up and see which one it actually is. I can come back to you with that. I didn't look that up, which actual word it was. But you can find it. Strong's Concordance will help you with that if you want. I will also look it up and bring it back next week. And then he also uses the word fulfill. So meaning to fill completely, to accomplish, to make full, to complete, to end. And he used that term 15 different times when talking about Jesus. And again, that's important because of what we're doing, or what he was doing in that book, right? He's essentially trying to bridge the gap between Old Testament and New Testament. And so he's reminding these people, hey, this thing that you know, culturally, the thing we're waiting for, it's been fulfilled. It's over. It's done. Jesus is it. This is it, right? Does that make sense? He's trying to drive the point home, for lack of a better way to say it. Yes,
With
ma'am.
Matthew being of the Levite tribe, he was probably raised up, as a child,
Mm-hmm.
taking care of the temple and whatever they lived in the temple at that time in Jerusalem. So he probably has the knowledge of, the Old Testament, which probably any Jewish man is probably,
Right.
learned in the first 5 books.
Yes.
So that's why he's probably a good representative here
Mm-hmm.
of tying that
Right.
reference back.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's also a reminder of how, in their eyes, how far he would have fallen,
Right.
right, as a tax collector, because you should know, what are you doing? with Rome, like you of all people, right? Because Levites were the priestly tribe, if I'm remembering all of that correctly right now. So it would have been an even greater like that he became what he became, right?
But
So,
then for him to
But then for him to go back,
to the
right,
the
right.
apostle at this point, from
Mhm,
being disciple to
mhm,
now apostle,
mhm.
and then writing it down.
Yep.
And if his audience, like he was saying,
He would be a
the
disgraced
Jews,
authority,
yeah,
basically.
but now because he's writing to the
Yeah.
Jews, he's pulling in that authority
Yep.
of his past and of the Old Testament and
Mhm.
seeing its fulfilled, because he's giving the Jewish
Yeah.
audience, here it is
Yep.
in the Old Testament, and
Yep.
here it is now.
Yes.
With what Jesus
And he's
did.
speaking to people who knew what he was talking about, right? Because if you were to have a, oh no, I'm going to mess up the word, a bat mitzvah, bar,
boy, yeah,
bat mitzvah, you have to know and memorize the Torah,
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
Like just wow,
And
right?
singing it, right? Do they sing it?
I don't know if they, I can't, I
Well,
have to
it
look it up
sounds
if they
like
sing it.
singing. Yeah, I don't know if they're technically singing it, but that's what it
But
sounds like.
yeah, perhaps.
Amazing.
I know that they have cantors in temple that's kind of how they sound. It's kind of like it has that kind of Middle Eastern flavor to it. So maybe I don't know, maybe singing is the best word for it, but yeah. Anyway, my point in saying that is that he's talking to an audience who would know what he is talking about without him having to over explain himself, like we'll see in some of the other gospels where explanation is needed because the audience has no context for what is being discussed.
You know, I made the point in the last class, Matthew is a Levite,
Mhm.
but there was no Ark of God, according to the textbook in the last class, in the temple, in the Herod's temple.
Hmm.
So what was back there then?
I don't know, but that's not going to be what we talk about right this second. I'm so sorry. These are great questions. I will look into it and get back to you. But yeah, for this purpose, that's not what we're looking at. Because at this point, he's looking at Jesus, so it doesn't matter what was in there. Does that make sense? Sorry, I feel bad. Okay. Anyway, let's look at some of the unique features that are also part of the book of Matthew. The ancestry of Christ gets traced all the way back to Abraham, the first ancestor of the Jews, and to David, the king of the Jews, through whom the Messiah would come. So again, he's hammering home the point. Who is the father of the faith to the Jews? God is the God of Abraham, right? So he takes Jesus all the way back to Abraham, right? Who is the best king that Israel's ever had? David. So he says, remember, Jesus is of that bloodline, right? He even gets called the son of David. Yeah?
How do Jews not make this correlation? I don't understand when they have the first same 5 books of the Bible. All the
Because largely, and this is where you come back to culture, they're looking for salvation to come in a specific way.
Right.
I mean, I don't know that we can understand it as Americans because we don't get occupied in that way as a culture. We haven't been. But it would be like what Hitler did to Germany, right? He rose to power. He started taking over lands. He started moving people out of their homes. This is Israel's history, right? Like they've been exiled, they've been overtaken, they've been overthrown, they've been batted, tossed to and fro. They've gone through horrible events. Just the Old Testament's full of ugh, right, for them. So they're waiting for someone to come who's going to end all of that ugh, right? And in their mind, Jesus didn't do that. He didn't and as mentioned later, he comes in on a donkey, not on a horse, like a warrior would have at the time. A Roman would have come in, a warring king would have come in a different way, and he came in humble and lowly, right? Like, so the way that Jesus presented himself, yes, as king and king of the Jews, just not in the way that culturally they were hoping for. Does that make sense?
yeah.
And it's still that way now.
I just don't understand how they can't make I get that part, so it's like that wasn't what I expected it to be, maybe, but there's still all this prophecy he fulfilled, like the lineage,
But you have to
like,
choose
so
to see it.
specific about who he's gonna be.
You have to choose to see it that way.
Yeah.
A part of where they weren't seeing it is the Pharisees, by the time that Jesus came, they had threaded so much of their own tradition in their interpretation that they weren't getting clean scripture either. They They were really being preached the interpretation based on the Pharisees reading the scriptures. And the Pharisees
Think about that.
understood, so they were getting that too.
Mhm.
And what the Pharisees were telling them was, until we purify all of us, the Messiah can't come.
Mhm.
I see.
And they also believed that Jesus was going to the Messiah was probably going to come to those who were most dedicated, which
And
would
they
be the
couldn't
Pharisees.
read it
Right.
for themselves.
So this guy shows up claiming to be the Messiah, but they haven't seen any of the impurities get changed.
Yeah.
Therefore, he can't be it.
And on
For
top of
numerous
that, they
reasons.
were looking for a rescuer. They were looking for a king like David.
Mhm.
They didn't realize God was going to come himself.
Mhm.
Like that realization, like, I believe you're the rescuer, but I don't. Even his disciples were going, I don't quite understand what you're saying about yourself, because they were not anticipating God saying, I'm going to step down. I'm going to come and insert myself in
Yeah.
David. Like, they weren't expecting that, because it wasn't what they had seen in their history.
Mhm.
They had seen David, they had seen Abraham, they had seen Moses, they had seen, Elijah. They had not seen God himself
Yep.
come to them, Emmanuel, and they were not expecting that
Yep.
at all. They were expecting a lot of other things, and he came as very few of those
Something
things that they
different.
were expecting, right?
Different
the way God
package.
does things is so subversive to what we expect.
Yep.
So.
Even to the point that he says to him, to Simon, he says, the Lord like God himself revealed this to you, because he says, who do you say that I am? And he says, well, you are the Christ. And he's like, wow, like floors Jesus, right? And that's somebody who's been walking with him for a hot minute, right? And the rest of the guys are like, oh, some say you're this and you're Elijah, and some say that you're this person. And because essentially they're believing, and to me, this is another aside. The amount of faith it takes to believe that Jesus was a reincarnated version of a previous prophet that they knew about, that's some faith, right? But so is believing that he's God himself on earth, right? So they had a measure of faith, even the disciples walking with him, but only one of them in that moment looked and said, you're the Christ, the Son of the God.
Realization of what God was doing.
Right? Like, and so for the people who weren't with Jesus every single day and who had built a religious schema for themselves of how this is supposed to be, and how Judaism is supposed to be, and how sanctification is supposed to be, and how these things are supposed to work and function, and God has to come a specific way and check all of our boxes, essentially. And Jesus didn't do that. So sorry about it. Right?
And
It's a good lesson
I
for
mean,
us now.
Yeah.
what you said,
Right?
there's a big thing I'm forgetting, which you just reminded me of, is they didn't have, like, they couldn't just go read their Bible.
Correct.
And
Correct.
like we do right now, so.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, there's that.
We
But,
We
okay.
armchair it a lot, but it's easy
Yeah.
for us to look at it from here.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yep. Because we're looking back and they're looking in the right now. This is
Yeah.
the right now for them.
Yeah.
Which is, it's harder to recognize incredible history making moments
Yeah.
when they're happening.
If you go look
So
at the
now
Old
why don't Jews believe? No, we won't go
If
there.
you go
but-
look at the Old Testament all by itself and don't think about anything in the New Testament and go, what would they have been expecting? It wasn't anything like what Jesus was.
Yeah.
And that's why they
Yep.
didn't understand it.
And a lot of Jews right now, they don't read the New Testament.
Well, they don't.
They
I actually
don't.
saw a video recently
Well, I mean,
of
it's
a Christian who was
accessible,
going to
and
witness.
I don't have a lot of Jewish friends, but I was visiting a woman that's Jewish but not practicing Jewish, whatever. And I said, well, haven't you read the New Testament? And she says, no.
Why would they?
And she's like in her 70s.
Mhm.
Sure.
But, I mean, but yeah,
It's
I guess
not-
if you
it's
don't
not
have
their
that
motivation.
interest,
It's not. When we covered this in my world religions class, the Jews are quite literally being told still, Messiah is to come. Be on the lookout. At any moment, the Messiah could show up, right? And so why would they read a book, a half of the Bible,
Blasphemy.
that
They
is
don't believe.
that is contrary to what they've been told, right? So since Jesus' time, they've been told he wasn't it, right? So why read a book about the guy who's not it? It would not, it doesn't correlate, right? It would be like me looking at every one of you and going, go read the Quran. It's important. True salvation is found in it. And you'd be like, blasphemy, get out of here, right? It's similar for them. It's a book of the Christian faith, not a book for the Jewish faith.
Yeah.
They will do the prophets. They will do, because they'll do the Pentateuch, right? So the bulk of the Old Testament. Some of them won't read because it's too much Jesus foreshadowy, right? Like just from knowing some of the Jews that I've known, they focus largely on the Torah still, largely. Anyway, so yeah. Well, where were we?
Sorry.
It's okay.
Ancestry
I'm
is
trying to keep us straight and on time. Here we go. Okay. So, yeah, ancestry. The rest of the unique features. Unique features. That's where we are. Okay. There are 9 Beatitudes and 13 more often quoted sayings in Matthew. Matthew has many long discourses, so nice long sections of things that are said. To put that as plainly as I can. And then there are 45 parables, 13 of which are unique to the book of Matthew. So you can't find those particular parables anywhere else except in Matthew's gospel. And then Matthew alone records the Trinitarian baptismal formula. So when Jesus is actually baptized, talks about it from a Trinitarian perspective. Okay? Let's see. Oh, I also wanted to say this. He gives us 2 miracles as well that Jesus performs that are found nowhere else. So not just parables, 13 of them being unique to Jesus. He gives us 2 miracles that are found nowhere else. They are healing of the 2 blind men and the miracle coin found in the fish's mouth. Those miracles are unique to the book of Matthew. Okay? And so that's it for the Gospel of Matthew. So we're going to look at the book of Mark next, unless there's any more questions on Matthew. Feel goodish? Okay. All right, Gospel of Mark, here we go. Who wrote it? Jeff, just kidding. No, it wasn't Jeff. Who wrote it? Who do you think? What do your slides say?
John Mark.
John Mark. Now, who was John Mark? Got him.
Peter.
Any thoughts? Who was he?
He was one that wasn't a disciple. He was young, a young boy. But there is reference that he might have been in the Garden of Gethsemane because he's the one that might have been the one that was running off with his clothes being ripped off or something like that.
Okay.
This is Barnabas's cousin.
Okay. These are we're talking. I'm gonna tell you who he is in a second, but I just want to see what you guys think.
Oh, 'cause he was,
Oh, yeah, at the very end it says he may have been led.
The
The
unclad lad. The unclad lad. Okay. Enough.
Now you can say Garden of Gethsemane.
Right. So John Mark is the author. John, who is also called Mark. Okay. The Bible never actually refers to somebody named John Mark. Okay. What you actually get is several passages in the book of Acts that refer to a man, and they say it like this: John, also called Mark. Okay. So
Pick a name, bro.
pick a name. Essentially, though, what you see with that is that John is his Hebrew name and Mark is his Latin name, right? So depending on who he's talking to, same guy though. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. So he is also known as the son of one Mary,
Yeah.
and that is in Mark 12:12. So John Mark, we're going to call him that for clarity's sake, is first mentioned in Acts 12:12. Where Luke uses him to distinguish which Mary he's talking about. Okay, so this is the quote from Acts 12:12. When this had dawned on him, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John, also called Mark, where many people had gathered and were praying. Okay, since Mary was a homeowner and had at least one servant, which we can see from Acts 12 verse 13, and Christians also gathered in her home, it was likely that she was wealthy and a reputable woman. Okay?
House church.
House church, right? So that's important to note. So she was not just some slouch. She was a reputable, wealthy woman. And perhaps the person whose home also was the place where they met for the upper room. That's theorized idea. That's why it uses the word perhaps. Okay, and we can kind of extrapolate that from Mark 14 verses 12 through 16 and Acts 12 verses 12 and 14. Possibly, like I said, well-to-do because she owned a pretty big home, and his cousin also owned land. So essentially painting the picture that he was from a wealthier family. Okay. He was also once a missionary companion of Paul, and you can see that in Acts 13:5. He was a nephew, some say, or cousin, some say, of Barnabas, depending on how you call it. And you can see that in Colossians 4:10. And then he was also the subject of a big dispute between Paul and Barnabas. And you see that in Acts 15, verses 37 through 40. The belief, so a little bit more on that. So the belief that John Mark was the cousin or nephew of Barnabas adds a bit of a twist to this disagreement that Paul and Barnabas had over him, right? So essentially Barnabas is like, it's my family, bro, like in some capacity, family, right? Whether it's a cousin or nephew. Paul didn't want to bring John Mark with them on their second journey because he had abandoned them in the middle of their first one, okay? But Barnabas wanted John Mark to come with them so badly that he was willing to leave Paul. And it makes a little bit more sense that he would be willing to do that if he was family. Okay. Let's see. He was then later reconciled to Paul in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 11. And then he was also a companion or a disciple of Peter. 1 Peter 5:13, Peter refers to him as, quote, my son, which would mean spiritually his son. And then church fathers Papias and Clement of Alexandria both state that Mark wrote a factual and inspired gospel with the help of Peter while Peter was still living. Okay? So this leads to the question of, was he actually an eyewitness to the gospel?
Sounds like no.
Thoughts?
Yes.
Yes? Sounds like no? Different thoughts?
Slightly.
Oh,
I
maybe I have
can't-
clickies.
I don't see where it's being talked about, so I don't know if we actually have a place to catch up or not.
Here.
Yeah, no, I'm looking in the right place.
Yeah, right there.
Right.
Yeah, all of this is back information that I'm giving you.
Gotcha.
It's not necessarily on your slides.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So here's the thought. Was he an eyewitness to the gospel? Some scholars, really, really, really smart folks, they believe that the author of the Gospel of Mark never actually includes himself in the narrative. So essentially they're saying he's telling someone else's story, right? The idea being, perhaps this is really a gospel of Peter. That's one theory. And John Mark is actually writing it for Peter. Okay, that's a theory that's out there. Papias specifically said, Mark, quote, neither heard the Lord or followed him, end quote. It's a pretty bold statement. He did, however, base his gospel on the account of someone who did, Peter. And so that's where this idea comes from, is from an early church father named Papias that believed that Peter is actually the one telling these stories, that had lived these stories, that it was a first-hand eyewitness account, but John Mark was essentially the one writing it out for him. Okay?
It's like they say a lot of Paul's letters.
Right, which right.
Because he talks so
Yeah.
fast, he had to have a scribe.
Yeah.
Right.
Which we'll get into that. You'll start to see a little bit how common kind of this idea is when it comes to writing books of the New Testament.
Actually, probably a lot of people didn't know how to write back then either. I mean, were they educated that way?
Didn't you say that he was there though, when Peter was put in prison and he was busted out? Is that what you were saying?
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. No. But so this is a idea, right? Essentially what I'm presenting to you is that there's multiple ideas about this, okay? Because some scholars actually say Mark did include himself, and that goes back to the naked boy in the garden, right? To put it plainly so I don't tongue-tie myself. So in Mark 14:51 through 52, there's a young man who escapes the Garden of Gethsemane, basically naked, which why he was naked, it's confusing to me. Maybe they just mean he took off his like identifying robes, which is maybe why they couldn't tell exactly who he was. I'm not sure. So essentially, this is what's interesting to note. The authors of these books are actually pretty self-depreciating or self-incriminating in the New Testament. You'll see that. They'll include, with the exception of John, He's like, I'm the best one, you know. But most of them are like, oh yeah, you know, this thorn in my side, or I'm dealing with this, or I'm going through that, right? They include the bad stuff as well as the good stuff. So it tracks that Mark would include this story about himself if in fact it was him, right? So you can kind of say he's being self-depreciating. It's probably him. Could this mean that he was a later addition to those who followed Jesus? So he still needed to get stories from Peter, right? Because maybe he was added towards the end of Jesus's ministry rather than the beginning, right? Perhaps that's an idea. Which is perhaps why he's known as a disciple of Peter and then a companion of Paul later on, right? Because again, Paul was around when Jesus was around, but Paul was Saul then, right? Okay, so is John Mark the same person as Mark the Evangelist? That's another thing that comes up about John Mark. John Mark is traditionally considered the same person as Mark the Evangelist, the author and gospel of the Gospel of Mark. So just so you know, I'm not going to get into all the details of that. But there are people that say, no, those were two different Marks. It is widely believed that it was the same Mark. Okay? So I'm going to skip that for time's sake. There is no outright proof. Okay, well, after what I just said. People believe it, but they can't, because they can't prove that it's not him. Does that make sense? There's no outright proof that John Mark is Mark the Evangelist, but there's also no proof that he isn't Mark the Evangelist either. So in this instance, the tie goes to the runner, and he's Mark the Evangelist, if that makes sense, hopefully. Anyway, so when was it written? Let's talk about that. AD 55 to AD 60. To whom was it written? Roman Christians. Interesting. This is something I like to think about. If you're a Roman Christian, what does that mean?
You might not want to tell anybody.
It would mean you were perhaps pagan, polytheist, right? Because Romans believed in, we've been mentioning this whole time, Roman, Greek mythologies. They had other gods. There were temples and things being built in Israel to these false gods. And now they're coming to the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ, right?
Mhm.
Pretty cool. So essentially, not Jew, but Roman. So different culture, different history, different belief system, different holy days or holidays, right? So you're starting to see this idea of the cost for converting to Christianity changing the whole of somebody's life.
Yep.
And you can see that a little bit easier. It would change a lot of things for a Jewish person as well, don't get me wrong. But it's a little bit easier to see in the life of a Roman because of their polytheistic nature. Does that make sense? Okay, so I think that's interesting, which again points back to the idea that this is for everybody, no matter what you believe. If you don't believe or you believe in 50,000 gods, Jesus is for you, right? We can relate to that still today, is essentially the point. So here's where the readers were located. If it was written to Roman Christians, probably to Rome, right? And to the Roman world. And the reason that the Roman world is included is because Rome was doing what? Occupying lots of other places, right? They were conquering other lands. So not just to Rome, the city or the place, but actually to the whole of the Roman world. So the letter was written to people far and wide, essentially. Why did he write it? To depict Christ as servant to Romans. And we see that in Mark 10, verse 45. Why would that be important to a Roman, to see Jesus as a servant?
Because if he was any kind of ruler or authority, they would feel threatened by him.
Absolutely.
It's the only way to get the message across to them.
So you see the difference between Matthew presenting Jesus as king, which would have been a huge threat to the Roman world, right? King who? Which we got to see when Jesus was born, right?
Right.
Right? Kill them all. I don't care. Kill all the babies, all the kids, all of them. Murder them all the boys, dead, gone. Annihilate the threat, right? That is what you get to see. So you don't see Jesus depicted as king in Mark. You get to see him depicted as servant instead. Still valuable, still important. One of the biggest things Jesus said about himself was that he came to serve, right?
Yep.
So also to give a historical explanation of quote unquote the gospel, which again, why would that be important to a Roman? Because they don't know it, right? Their culture, their lessons, their histories, their stories are not Jewish ones. They're Roman ones. So a greater level of explanation of the history of how we got to where we are would be required for them to have context and to understand what's being explained to them about Jesus. Why is this Jewish boy important to me at all? Why should I care? Explain it, right? It's a apologetic, if you will. Okay? An apologetic to the Romans for Jewish unbelief in their own Messiah, right? Because Romans are occupying this land. They know that this person and this person and this person in this house is like, we ain't on this Jesus track. They know who the Sadducees and the Pharisees and the religious leaders are. They know that they're not accepting Jesus. So Mark has to explain, so sorry, here's why they don't believe, and here's why you should, right? It's, again, an apologetic. And you can see that in Mark chapter 3, verse 5, and in chapter 7, verse 6. Okay, let's move through. What is it about? The theme, Christ, the servant of the Lord. Key verse, Mark 10:45. We won't read it for time's sake, and I'll run through the key words and phrases, but please read it on your own, Mark 10:45. Key words and phrases. Authority is mentioned 10 times. Straight away or immediately is mentioned 40 times. This is the word ethos. It is used more here than it is used in the rest of the entire New Testament. So Mark is got a big emphasis on immediate, right now. Unique features. Mark doesn't give Christ's ancestry because, again, why would they care? The Jews are an occupying nation. Why do I care about you? You are subservient to us, right? And again, if they did give the ancestry, they would have to say he's in the lineage of kings, which would be threatening, right? So he's being smart, if you will, okay? Essentially also because the theme is Christ is a servant, and a servant doesn't need a lineage. Doesn't matter. Mark has 3 times as many miracles as he does parables. Mark contains 18 miracles, only 4 parables, and only 1 discourse. Mark is more biographical than theological. Essentially, it stresses the works, not the words of Jesus. So again, I don't care who you are, show me what you can do. Right? The book easily divides itself between Jesus' Galilean ministry and his Judean ministry. And it's a gospel of activity and power. Why? Because both were desirable things for Roman people. Right? You're talking about a conquering, warring nation. Power is important. So show me what you can do. Especially if you're claiming to be a servant who can do all this incredible stuff, right? Which takes you back to the story of what? The Roman centurion. Right? That's what it brings to my mind. Just say the word. I've heard what you can do. Just say it. I know you'll do it. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the last thing is, it alone mentions Simon's sons. That is in chapter 15, verse 21. Oh, that wasn't the last thing. I'm sorry, I lied to you. It's the only gospel to call Jesus a carpenter. So we wouldn't know he was a carpenter if it wasn't here. That's in Mark 6, verse 3. And Mark presents Jesus as an ideal Levite, both servant of man and of God, before the altar and on the altar. And the Gospel of Mark is the briefest of them all. Nice and short. Okay, that's it. So, class is done. We've talked about all the introductory things, Matthew and Mark. You have quiz 1 that is available for you at your disposal. Again, encouraging, gentle, kind reminder. Don't wait till the end to take all these quizzes, please. You will not like yourself for it. Take it as soon as you can. Okay? But again, not required. So if you want to wait, I guess wait. Okay? Have a great night, guys. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh.